So today's video is going to be another solved true crime case. Today we're going to be talking about the case of Becky Watts. But yeah, I'm going to keep this intro pretty short because I feel like this is going to be a super long video, and for that reason the camera angle might keep changing throughout the video because I might have to take breaks while I'm filming this. Quickly before I get into it, I just want to give my usual disclaimer that I mean absolutely no disrespect to anyone that I talk about in this video. This is all just information that I have found on the internet and I'm compiling into one video. So Rebecca Marie Watts, better known as Becky Watts to friends and family, was a 16-year-old girl born on June the 3rd, 1998. She lived in Bristol with her father Darren and her stepmother Angie, who had actually been her stepmother or her dad's girlfriend since Becky was only 2 years old, and so Angie was pretty much like a mother to Becky. Becky's biological mother was called Tanya, and due to different financial problems and social services problems, she'd always lived with her dad, Darren. Becky also had an older biological brother named Daniel Watts, who was 2 years older than her, and he actually did live with Becky and Darren and Angie for a long part of his life until he was a little bit older and he finally moved in with his biological mother, Tanya. And as well as that, Becky also had a stepbrother who was Angie's son to a previous marriage. He was called Nathan Matthews and was 10 years older than Becky, so quite a big age gap. Due to financial problems at the start of his life, Nathan lived with his grandmother, so Angie's mother, and then finally when the financial situations were sorted out, Nathan didn't really want to leave his grandma's house because his friends were there, his school was there, and so he would just come over and see Angie, Darren and Becky on weekends.
They were like brother and sister and they acted like it as well. We was a little family unit, weren't we? Yeah. We'd be a little dysfunctional because we're all from, you know, different parents and partners and all that sort of thing, but no, we all linked together. We was quite a strong little unit.
Okay, so I understand that that was quite a lot of information to give you all in one go, so I'm just going to kind of summarise the family tree. So there was Becky, who lived at home with her father Darren and her stepmother Angie. Her stepmother had a son named Nathan who would see Becky on weekends, however he didn't live with them during the week. And Becky also had a biological brother, Danny, who she didn't really see as much because he lived with his mother. Becky absolutely loved her older brothers. She was that kind of annoying little sister that would follow them around, want to play their video games, and she was only like 2 or 3 years old, so it's not like she could really join in, but she loved them so much. She wanted to play with them all the time, and when she was 2 years old, her first clear word was actually Nathan. However, Nathan didn't quite share the same love and appreciation for Becky as she did for him. He was very protective over his mother, very kind of selfish in the way that he didn't want to share her love, and so when 2 new step-siblings came in, he didn't like that at all. And you've got to remember that he was 10 years older than Becky, so they don't really have anything in common yet, and they can't really play together, and so he just kind of didn't really like her. He was a bit easier on Becky's older brother Daniel because he was 4 years old when he met him, and so he could kind of join in on the video games and things. However, Becky was just far too young and he just kind of found her a bit annoying. When Becky was 11 years old, she moved up to high school and immediately she was targeted by bullies pretty badly. They would make fun of everything they possibly could about Becky. Her looks, her weight especially seemed to be a particular topic that they would bully her about, and they even once stole her jacket straight out of her hands. And Becky, as you can imagine, was really affected by the bullying, to the point where she would come home every single day crying, saying that she wanted to lose weight and hopefully that might stop the bullying. I don't think Becky was even a little bit overweight. I think she was a completely healthy weight. However, Darren and Angie wanted to try and make her feel a little bit better, and so they bought in some diet foods and things because if losing weight made Becky feel a little bit happier, then they'd do it. And quickly Becky lost a lot of weight and her family started noticing that she was throwing away food, leaving a lot of food on her plate at meal times, and she was just kind of wasting away in front of them. Eventually it got to a point where Becky was so thin that Darren and Angie took her to the doctors, and at just 12 years old Becky was diagnosed with anorexia, and almost hospitalised because she was that underweight. But still, the bullying only really got worse, and Becky started skipping school for multiple reasons, obviously in part due to the bullying, but also because she was so underweight, because she was so malnourished. She was always ill, she was always dizzy whenever she tried to do things, so she was missing a lot of school, to the point where Becky's family were getting legal threats if she didn't start attending school. And on top of that, Becky was also being bullied at home, not just at school, by her stepbrother Nathan Matthews, who would call her fat. He would say that she needed to lose weight. Even though she was dangerously underweight, he was just making the situation 10 times worse. And at this point, Nathan had just turned 23 and he was bullying a 12-year-old girl. And not just any 12-year-old girl, his stepsister, which he'd grown up with for the past 10 years. By the age of 13, Becky was recovered physically from her anorexia. She was back to a healthy weight, she was eating normally. Obviously, it was going to take a little bit longer to help her mental state, because anorexia is a mental illness before it affects your kind of physical health. But she seemed a lot happier, she was a lot healthier, and things seemed to be going really well for Becky. When Becky was around 15 years old, her stepmother Angie was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, also known as MS, which, as you can imagine, was hard on all of the kids. And if you know what MS is, like if you've ever seen anyone go through that, then you'll know just how hard it is to watch someone deteriorate in front of you, and that was Becky's mother figure her whole life, so it was really hard on her. As well as her eating disorder, Becky also suffered with anxiety and the occasional depressive episode, which possibly could stem from her anorexia, which came first. And despite her kind of rough relationship with her stepbrother Nathan, Becky's relationships with the rest of her family seemed to be pretty good. She loved her dad, she loved her stepmom, they all got on quite well, so in that context, she was pretty happy. Becky and her father Darren did have the odd fight, but I mean, what daughter and father don't? I mean, that's pretty normal. However, during one of these arguments that Becky and her father had, Darren actually kicked Becky out of the house, and she was forced to go and stay with a friend for a while. Becky was a very shy girl, probably in part due to her anxiety disorder. However, her father just said that ever since she was younger, she was always very clingy, very shy. It was just kind of in her nature.
She had tons of confidence with us. She felt secure and safe. But the minute she went out for that front door, she was timid and mousy. And
because of this, Becky had few but close friends who she was in contact with every single day. She didn't have like a huge group by any means. There were just a few close friends that she felt comfortable with, and she would talk to them all the time. But on Thursday, February 29th, 2015, Becky Watts suddenly went very quiet on social media, and she stopped replying to her friends' texts and messages. Her friends were obviously a little bit worried, but there's so many different explanations for this. Maybe her phone died, maybe she was busy. Like, people go quiet on social media for a day all the time. So like I said, it was a Thursday when Becky went quiet on social media. However, none of her family had actually seen her since Tuesday night, because on the Wednesday she was out with friends all day, and then on the Wednesday night she slept over at a friend's house. And so when Becky never returned home on Thursday the 19th of February, her stepmother Angie just kind of thought that she was staying over at her friend's again. It was half term and they did have sleepovers quite often. She couldn't get hold of Becky either. She wasn't answering a text, she wasn't answering her calls, and obviously Angie was worried, but you always come up with a kind of reasonable explanation for stuff like that. Like I said, it was the holidays, Angie thought she was with a friend, and so she might have been having a lot of fun, her phone might have died, she just might be too busy to answer her phone. But still, the next morning, on Friday the 20th of February 2015, no one had seen Becky for 3 days. No one in Becky's family had seen her for 3 days anyway. And so at this point it was really worrying because she still wasn't answering her phone, and no one had seen her for 3 days. Becky still wasn't posting on social media, and I don't actually think she had a family on social media, I don't know. And so her friends were the only people that noticed she wasn't posting on social media, and she also wasn't replying to her friends' texts, and her friends then realised that something was really wrong when she hadn't been replying to them for 2 whole days at this point. and so they decided to go to her house in case anything was wrong. And so Becky's friends arrived at her house, asked where she was, and her stepmother Angie this whole time had assumed that she was just with her friends. And so when all of Becky's close friends turned up without Becky, this immediately sent Angie into panic mode. She rang Darren at work and she realised that something was really wrong. And as you can imagine, this was really kind of out of character for Becky Watts. Like I said, she had anxiety, she had a general just kind of timid nature. She didn't like going anywhere alone or unless she was with someone that she was comfortable with. And since everyone that she was kind of close to and comfortable with were all in the same position, none of them knew where she were, none of them were with her, this kind of suggested that maybe Becky wasn't gone off her own accord.
I remember just being so confused as to where she was. She wasn't the type of person that would go somewhere and not tell people where she was going. She wasn't the kind of person to stay out late either. She'd always go to bed really early.
So like I said, Becky's stepmother Angie phoned Darren, her father, while he was at work. And so when it kind of clicked in his head that he hadn't seen her since Tuesday, no one knew where she was, he realised how serious it was, and so he came home from work early.
This is so far out of her character that there is no way she has done this. Something has happened and I don't know where she is, and we need to find her, and we need to find her fast.
So Darren sent Becky's friends upstairs to go and have a look through her room, see if anything was gone, maybe if she'd run away and taken things with her, or if anything was just kind of a bit different. And that was when they realised that her phone, her tablet and her laptop had all gone, as if she'd kind of taken them and run away. But none of Becky's clothes were missing, none of her makeup was missing. She wore makeup every day. She hadn't taken any money with her, and obviously she hadn't told any of her friends or family where she was going or even that she was going, which again was really out of character for Becky. And so obviously all of this worried Becky's family so much that they called the police at 4 o'clock on the 20th of February and reported Becky as missing.
Even search the police, how can I help? It appears my daughter's gone missing. Okay. No one has seen her, no? No. We phoned round the family, all her friends have contacted us and asking where she is, and none of them know. What's her name? Rebecca Watts.
So at this point, at the point when Becky was reported as missing, she hadn't been actually seen by anyone in 48 hours. And if you're familiar with disappearance cases, 48 hours is a dangerously long amount of time to wait to report someone missing. Obviously her family hadn't known until then, so there was nothing they could really do. However, 48 hours meant that the chances of finding Becky alive were really, really slim. If the child isn't found within the first 6 hours of their disappearance, the chances of finding them alive are halved. And then after 12 hours, the chances are halved again. After 24 hours, it's halved again. And so at 48 hours, you can only imagine the chances of finding Becky Watts alive. And it's just a shame that there wasn't any, communication in this case, because obviously they reported her missing as soon as they realised she was missing. However, you just do make excuses as to maybe why they're not posting on Facebook or maybe why they're not answering your texts. And it's just really unfortunate. So like I said, Becky Watts was reported missing on Friday at 4 p.m. However, even though she was a child, she was 16 years old, and the police knew she'd been missing for 48 hours at this point. It still took them 2.5 hours to respond to that. They didn't get to Becky's house until 6:30 p.m. that day. So the police arrived, and obviously all Becky's friends and family were telling them everything they knew up until the last time that they saw her. And that was when Shauna, Becky's stepbrother Nathan's girlfriend, said that she actually knew something that no one else did. Shauna said that she believed that Becky was in the house the morning before. So on the Thursday morning, she said that she thought that Becky was in the house because Shauna was also in the house. She never actually saw Becky with her own eyes. However, you know when you're just in the house and you just kind of know that someone else is there because of noises and things like that, she just thought that Becky was in the house on the Thursday morning before. Okay, so let me set up a kind of timeline for you because I know that this can be quite confusing. So the last time that Becky was definitely seen was on the Tuesday night by her father Darren. And then the following day, on the Wednesday, she spent the whole day with friends and then stayed over at a friend's house on the Wednesday night, which I believe did happen. I believe all that did happen. and so she just wasn't seen by any family since Tuesday. And then up until now, we'd believed that no one had seen her since then, since she left her friend's house on the Thursday morning. No one had seen her on the Thursday and no one had seen her on the Friday, and that is why she was reported missing. However, now Shauna, Nathan's girlfriend, was adding the fact that Becky had been in her own house on that Thursday morning, meaning that she was still around on Thursday morning. She hadn't actually disappeared yet. However, like I said, Shauna didn't actually see Becky. She just kind of heard noises and thought Becky was there. The specific noises that Shauna heard, she said that she heard stomping down the steps and then the front door slam, and so she just kind of assumed that that was Becky leaving the house. And that takes us to the Friday when she was finally reported missing. No one had physically seen Becky Watts since the Thursday morning when she left her friend's house. Initially, police just kind of brushed it off. They thought that Becky maybe had gone off on her own. She was 16 years old. After all, teenagers just go off missing all the time and then they turn back up. However, Becky's family knew her. Like I said, she had anxiety, she was very shy. She wouldn't go out alone, she wouldn't go out unless she was with someone she was comfortable with. And they knew that there was more to this than just Becky going off on her own. So quickly, a social media campaign was set up called #FindBecky, where her face was shared, her name was shared, and overall this hashtag was seen by over 2 million people. And that night, Becky's father Darren stayed up all night. He didn't get any sleep because he was constantly calling Becky's phone, hoping that she was answering. He was leaving voicemail after voicemail and she just wasn't picking up. So the two main theories in the investigation at this point were kidnap and runaway. So during the public appeals where her family would go on TV, they would appeal for both things. So they would do an appeal straight to Becky just in case she had run away and she was watching the news. They'd say come home, and they would also appeal to a possible kidnapper or someone that was just kind of keeping Becky. Maybe if she had run away and they were letting her stay at their house, they were appealing to those people as well.
Bex, if you're watching this, please come home. We love you so much.
We really are so loved. Whenever you call Dad, please come home, or whoever's sheltering there. Do the right thing.
Bex, if you can see this, get in contact. And if anyone out there knows something, just tell us. Just bring her home safe. If you've got her, then put her somewhere we can find her. We want her home, please.
Searches were done in the kind of surrounding area, obviously for Becky, but also for any evidence or the belongings that she took with her, her laptop, phone, tablet, and there were hundreds of officers put onto this case, along with hundreds of volunteers from the public. The searches focused primarily on kind of houses in the local area, one in case Becky was being kidnapped and held somewhere, or two in case this was a runaway and someone was just letting her stay at their house. Other places that were searched included woods, lakes, parks, bodies of water, just in case they could find anything, any kind of evidence, but absolutely nothing was coming up from these searches. So at this point, police thought it might be useful to interview the people that Becky was close to. Not as suspects, but just to kind of get to know them, get to know Becky a little bit more, get to know her routine, because obviously up until now they'd been thinking this was a runaway and that wasn't like Becky at all, so clearly police didn't know her very well.
We were able to look for any things that didn't fit with the norm, so patterns that didn't fit with a normal week or accounts from what had happened in the critical day that, again, didn't seem right.
And also police said that they did this so that they could get to know the people they were questioning, get to know her dad, stepmom, brother, everyone like that, just in case maybe it was an inside thing. Because let's be honest, things like this do happen within families. There are domestic murders. There's cases such as the Shannon Matthews case, which I covered, where her own mother was holding her captive somewhere. Like, this could have been an inside thing. But the days were just passing by, the searches were going on, and still nothing, absolutely nothing was coming up. And so police thought it might be important to check her friends and family's alibis from that day. And these questionings mainly focused on Becky's stepbrother Nathan and his girlfriend Shauna, because, like I said, they were kind of the last people to be with her on Thursday morning. Like, they didn't see her, but they were the last people to be in a house with her.
Nathan and Shauna were the only two people that we interviewed that were actually difficult to pin down.
Does that raise a red flag with you?
Of course, if you've got witnesses or people that are within your investigation that don't appear to want to meet you, it's always going to cause you some concerns.
The officer that was questioning Shauna Haw said that she was very kind of giggly, very light-hearted, despite the severity and the seriousness of the questioning. Which, in fairness, as someone who has a really bad nervous laugh and a really bad nervous smile, I can understand how that could be the case. But then you have to question why she's so nervous. Yes, it could possibly be just the situation of being questioned by police in a formal setting. That's enough to make anyone nervous. Or is it because she is guilty of something and she is nervous that she's going to reveal something in this questioning? Who knows? Nathan Matthews, on the other hand, came across as very kind of chilled, very relaxed, almost to the point where he was kind of unbothered by the fact that his little sister was missing.
They were really consistent in their accounts. However, the detective side of your brain was also saying they fit together really conveniently and really, really neatly. Even the best witnesses will provide accounts which are factually incorrect. In this case, it's slotted together very, very neatly. It indicates to me collusion. They've talked to each other, they've got their stories straight.
Even though they both seemed relatively suspicious from their questioning, it wasn't evidence, it was just kind of suspicion, and so police couldn't really do anything about it. 6 days after Becky's disappearance, her father Darren and her mother Angie were moved out of the house where they lived with Becky so that it could be forensic searched. Because obviously that was where Becky lived, it was the last place she was seen, and so it just made sense to forensic search. Becky hadn't been seen by any neighbours leaving the house or walking around the kind of general area in the days of her disappearance. She wasn't seen by any of the general public, even though her face was all over the news. She also wasn't caught on any kind of CCTV cameras in the area, anything, and so all of that suggested to police that maybe she never actually left her house. Forensic teams found what they believed to have been blood, some red staining on the door frame of Becky's bedroom. And alongside these kind of possible blood stains was also some fingerprints, which were both huge clues that were taken off to be analysed.
It's very, very difficult to see with the naked eye. Some of it was down very low, some of it was about waist height, and some of it was approximately shoulder height. So the three different heights did seem to strike a chord in terms of why, had there been a struggle.
Meanwhile, police invited Nathan and Shauna back for more questioning, partly because they claimed to have been the last people to see Becky on that day, and also partly because of their strange behaviour in the last questioning. Nathan in particular was asked about his kind of relationship with Becky, and the answers that he gave were quite concerning.
Didn't particularly talk to her, but obviously I don't particularly like her, and obviously what annoys me is the way she speaks to like my mum sometimes. She'd be kind of like rude or whatever. I'm trying to think of an actual specific time.
So now police were aware that Nathan didn't really like Becky, and this does add to the suspicion, but at the same time it's not really evidence. Like, people don't get on all the time. It's not evidence to say that he had a hand in her disappearance. But the following day the results of the forensic testing came back, and it was found that the fingerprint in the blood belonged to none other than Nathan Matthews, Becky's stepbrother.
Everything needs to be put in context. The context here was Nathan and Becky didn't appear to get on, so how could that blood be in with his fingerprint in upstairs on the first floor, a location that we don't think Nathan went frequently? So that's the first real big turning point.
But the DNA test on the blood itself to find out whose blood that is was going to take a little bit longer to come back. If it was Becky's blood that Nathan's fingerprint was found in, then yeah, that's enough evidence to say that he is guilty, that he had something to do with her disappearance. But if the results came back and it was Nathan's own blood and it was his own fingerprint in his own blood, it'd make a little bit more sense. Obviously we don't know what happened, but maybe he'd had an accident, cut himself downstairs and went upstairs to maybe sort it out. It'd just make a lot more sense, and it wouldn't be evidence to say that he had anything to do with Becky's disappearance. But then the results of the blood test came back, and it was found to have been Becky Watts' blood. So 10 days after Becky was last seen, police immediately started to track down Nathan and Shauna and went to arrest them both at their home.
Hey, buddy. The reason I've come here is to make an arrest of yourself, okay? And what I'm going to do is explain everything here now, okay?
Just put your hands like that for me, alright?
They were both initially arrested for kidnap because even though there was blood, Becky could still be alive somewhere. This doesn't mean that she's dead, so it doesn't mean that it's murder.
Have you got any concerns or suspicions that Nathan or any other member of your family or extended family might be responsible for her disappearance?
No.
Why are you so sure?
Because none of them would do anything like that.
Police at this point in Shauna Hall's questioning were almost certain that she was lying. They didn't quite know about what, but they didn't feel like she was telling the truth. And obviously police in that situation, they've been through questioning and stuff before, they've seen people tell the truth and they've seen people lie. And so I feel like they're pretty good judges of character. And now that she was being questioned as a suspect rather than just a family member, this meant that they could really start grilling her and picking apart her answers.
Is there anything that happened that could be significant in the disappearance of Rebecca?
No.
Are you absolutely sure?
Yes.
I know you've got something to tell us. I can see it in your face.
I was just making sure there was nothing, like a weird, significant thing that I hadn't thought of. But I don't know.
But the same straightforward tactic that they used on Shauna didn't really work on Nathan. He is the kind of person that when he's faced with confrontation, he will completely just block you out and act really moody and uncooperative.
We want to find her. Where is she?
I don't know where she is.
Is she safe?
Well, I didn't know where she is, so I'm meant to know.
Do you know if she's alive?
Well, no.
Have you hurt her?
No, I haven't hurt her.
Nathan and Shauna were living together at the time in their own home just over a mile away from where Becky lived with Darren and Angie. And so while the two of them were being questioned by police, the house was also being searched for evidence.
Entering the house, opening front door alone is very challenging. It doesn't open properly because of the extent of the stuff behind the door. There are 2 fridge freezers behind the door.
There's 2 steps of stairs. That's via Clifford Hallway. Room to the left, which is a living area.
Each room is jam-packed with material, particularly the lounge, particularly the kitchen.
The rooms of the house, as you just saw in that clip, were completely just covered in clutter. It's a wonder how those two navigated the way around the house. There was barely any room to move. And it was so cluttered to the point where the police that were searching the house didn't even realise that there was an upstairs bathroom because there was that much crap in front of the door. But as police searched through the whole house, there was kind of no sign of Becky. Yes, it was a mess, but none of the mess was Becky's. There weren't any kind of signs that it was disrupted. It just seemed like this was the way that they lived and Becky wasn't there. That was until they found the upstairs bathroom and they had a look inside.
So I go upstairs, turn right into the bathroom, then there's a cooker, there's a microwave, you can barely see the sink. The bath on the right hand side is extremely clean to the point where it is very, very shiny. So that is what sticks in your mind immediately. It's out of place in context with the rest of the address.
Search teams also found 2 receipts hidden away in some kind of cabinet in the upstairs, both of which dated from the day that Becky went missing on the 19th of February. Both receipts were for a kind of homeware DIY store in the UK called B&Q, which just sell loads of tools and DIY things. And the receipts showed that someone had bought a circular saw, some goggles, some gloves and some face masks. And police immediately just thought of the worst case scenario, that they'd been and bought all this equipment to be able to dismember a body. And when the CCTV footage of that specific B&Q was checked, on the day of Becky's disappearance, the 19th of February, they found Nathan Matthews walking around the B&Q store, picking out a circular saw, just doing the shopping on these receipts. So now police decided to officially treat this as a murder inquiry, and so Shauna and Matthew were both rearrested for murder.
Your whole world just folds in on itself. They told me this is a murder inquiry, and I know I started shouting at that point. Oh no, 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 you're wrong, she's got to be alive.
Meanwhile, in Nathan Matthews' questioning, he had no idea that they were searching his house. Well, I'm guessing he knew that they were gonna search his house at one point, but he didn't know it was right then and there. And so he had no idea that they'd found the bathroom like that. He had no idea what was going on. And so the police decided to use this tactically in his questioning. They decided to kind of feed him that information to see if he'd just own up. Because if he knew that the police were searching his house and they were going to find the receipts, they were going to find the bathroom so clean, like maybe he would just give himself up and it would be so much easier for police. And that is exactly what happened. He went and spoke to his lawyer for a while, and then at 10 p.m. he returned and he had this massive long written statement that his lawyer then read out to the police.
Do I have to actually listen to it? Can I put my fingers in my ears? Yep, I'll do that, thank you.
So I'm just going to read the statement out in full, and I'm going to put like pictures and video clips over the top. I, Nathan Charles Matthews, accept that I am responsible for the death of Rebecca Watts. On the 19th of February 2015, I attended Crown Hill St George in Bristol with my girlfriend Shauna Haw. In my car I had a large stun device, handcuffs, tape and a mask. I developed an idea to scare Rebecca by kidnapping her. I wanted to scare her and teach her a lesson. I believed that she was selfish and her behaviour towards my mother was a risk to her health. A few minutes after arriving, Shauna said that she wanted a cigarette and went out into the garden. I went to the boot of my car, took out a bag that contained the items and went upstairs to the landing before knocking on Rebecca's door. She replied, "What?" or "Hello," and I said, "Can I see you a minute?" I cannot be sure in which order things happened, but I used the items I had to subdue Rebecca. During the short struggle, my mask slipped and Rebecca was able to see my face. This caused me to panic and I strangled her while she was partially in the bag. So that's the end of the written statement, but then Nathan Matthews then went on to verbally confess that he had dismembered Becky's body in the bath with that circular saw that he bought. He then admitted to wrapping up each separate body part and putting them into boxes, bags and suitcases and hiding them in a shed.
The nature of the find is horrific and shocking. I've never dealt with anything like this. And it'll stay with me throughout my service, it'll stay with me probably throughout my life. "12
days after Becky Watts was reported missing, her body parts were recovered from a shed. Her body was taken to a morgue where she could be formally identified by her family to be Becky Watts.
When we seen her in the morgue, and that's when it really hit home then. I mean, they did, for police and more, they did their best to cover up her, where they cut her up and things like that. But I could still see where they decapitated her. No parent should have to see that.
Becky's actual cause of death was found to have been suffocation, believed to have happened inside her own bedroom. But Becky put up a good fight. She sustained a lot of injuries to her body, cuts, bruises, a lot of bruises, scratches, all sorts, all over her body, particularly on her face and on her head. The autopsy also found that after Becky's death, her body sustained over 14 stab wounds and a lot more other injuries, and that was after she died. Her body was cut up into 8 different pieces, including a decapitation. Each piece was wrapped in cling film and put into different bags. Her body parts were also packed with cat litter to absorb any moisture and salt crystals to avoid any odour. Nathan later admitted to taping over Becky's eyes and her mouth while repeatedly punching her before she died, which to me doesn't really fit with the kind of accident storyline that he was going with. So now police had to investigate Nathan's written statement, because even though he'd confessed, they can't just take it for face value, they can't just believe him 100%. For a start, it was a very kind of innocent until it went wrong kind of situation, which is a story that a lot of criminals create when they're trying to lower their sentence as much as they possibly can. Obviously, if they just came out and just said, frankly, I'm a cold-blooded murderer, they're never going to be let out of prison again. However, if they try and spin it as if it was an accident, then they have a better chance of getting parole one day. He also, if you notice, didn't drag Shauna into it once. He said that she was outside the whole time, she had no idea what was going on inside, which is very hard to believe. And police found it hard to believe as well, that she had no idea that this was going on, she had no idea that Becky was dead. They just thought that there was no way that that was the case. Police just thought that there was no way that she was outside the whole time and had no idea that this was going on upstairs in the house. And on top of that, they will have put Becky's body into their car and then from their car into their house. Again, there was no way that Shauna didn't know that that was going on. And then obviously Nathan dismembered her body in the bath. There will have been a mess, there will have been a lot of noise, and unless he did it while Shauna was out of the house and cleaned it up really fast and packaged all the body parts up really fast, there is no way that she didn't know that that was going on. And if Shauna had so much as witnessed even a little bit of this murder, whether she watched the actual murder go on, whether she knew that they were taking the body back to the house, whether she had a part in the dismemberment, whether she even knew about a little bit, she could have been done for perverting the course of justice. And so police think that Nathan was just trying to protect Shauna by saying that it was all him, she had no idea at all, so that Shauna wouldn't get prison time.
He's trying to take the heat away from her. It was almost like there was an agreed path that they were going to walk, that they were going to deny it to a certain point. If he came on top, Nathan would accept culpability.
So police then used the same tactic on Shauna, trying to feed her a little bit of information to see if she will admit to anything. Shauna was being questioned while Nathan was admitting to this murder, and so the people questioning her decided to tell her that Nathan had just admitted to murdering, dismembering and hiding his stepsister's body.
What's your knowledge of him killing Becky?
Found out yesterday morning.
You found out yesterday morning?
Prior to that, I had no idea that he had any involvement in anything at all.
So now that Nathan had actually admitted to doing this and killing Becky, police decided to ask more questions about how he did it and why he did it. Partially to give Becky's family some kind of peace, to give them answers so that they knew how she died, but also partly to see if he would trip over his own story and contradict anything that he admitted to.
Was Becky stood up, Nathan, whilst you were strangling her?
No comment.
To what degree was she incapacitated then?
No comment.
Was she conscious at the time that you strangled her?
No comment.
But he was still saying that Shauna had no idea that he'd murdered Becky or hidden Becky or dismembered Becky the whole time. Shauna was completely clueless to him. Police questioned the couple for the maximum of 96 hours as allowed by the UK law, and then at the end of that they charged Nathan Matthews with the murder of Becky Watts. However, police still didn't have that kind of solid link between Shauna and Becky. Yes, they had a link from Shauna to Nathan and from Nathan to Becky. However, there was nothing between Shauna and Becky that said she had anything to do with it. It took police 2 whole months, but they finally found some evidence to say that Shauna maybe wasn't as innocent as she was making out. They looked through Nathan and Shauna's phones, which obviously they'd done right at the beginning. However, they hadn't looked at the deleted content of the phones just yet, because that takes a lot longer to get to, hence why it took a further 2 months. But they found some deleted text between Nathan and Shauna that showed the real motive for the murder and possible involvement on Shauna's behalf.
So it showed internet searching of pornographic material around Becky's age, but it also showed some text messaging between the two of them where they were talking about young females, potentially abducting a young female and taking them back to their home address and putting them in their loft.
So Shauna was questioned again, but now about the sexual motive of the murder. So one of the messages from Nathan to Shauna said, "Bring me back 2 pretty schoolgirls." And Shauna replied, lol, yeah, I'll just kidnap them from school. In another instance, Shauna texted Nathan saying, just went to Cost Cutter and saw a pretty petite girl, almost knocked her out to bring home, lol, XOXO. And that's a common thing in these two texts. They would say these horrible things and then they'd put like a lol on the end or an XOXO, and it's just so creepy. It like gives me the shivers. It's disgusting. And so Nathan replied to that text from Shauna about knocking that girl out at the shop, saying, don't you almost me, now fucking do it, bitch, with 4 X's on the end, and that last bit, that fucking do it, bitch, was in capitals. So Shauna replied, LMFAO, yeah, I'll just go back in time when I saw her, time travel with her to our attic, lol, XOXO. And there were a bunch of other text conversations which I'm just going to summarise because there's far too many for me to be able to read out like that in this video, and it was honestly like creeping me out to be saying those words out loud. But basically a lot of these conversations just kind of centred around kidnapping a young petite girl that was underage and keeping her in the attic to use as a sex slave. Other conversations revolved around specific girls that Nathan had like scouted on Facebook. Nathan had actually been planning on messaging this one particular girl, and Nathan actually worked in a takeaway restaurant at the time, and one day this girl came into the shop and Nathan texts Shauna saying that he was sad because he couldn't flirt with her while he was at work. And this girl was 16 at the time and Nathan was 27 years old. And it was at this point that everything started to click into place in Darren's mind, in Becky's father's mind. He had been seeing these warning signs from Nathan all his life, ever since he met him when he was 12. He'd been seeing warning signs that this day was coming for so long. But yeah, I'll get into those kind of warning signs a little bit later. I've got some interviews of Darren talking about these specific instances that he had with Nathan, and I'll talk about those at the end. I just wanted to let you know that it was then when it all kind of clicked for him. However, these texts obviously kind of contradict Shauna having no involvement in the murders, because it shows that she is on the same kind of wavelength as him. And obviously police believe that he didn't do it by accident. Police believe that he was trying to kidnap Becky and take him back to their house. Whether he intended on murdering her or not, that's a different story. However, he did intend on kidnapping her. And obviously now that we know his intentions and we know that Shauna was on the same wavelength, it's hard to believe that Shauna didn't have anything to do with it, anything to do with the planning or the actual carrying out. And it was then when all these texts were being analysed that forensic teams actually also found Shauna's DNA on one of the masks that was hidden in the shed.
What did that suggest Shauna had been doing?
It suggested that she'd been involved in the dismemberment and the packaging of Becky after she'd been killed. And again, a really significant moment, because that's the first time we could tie Shauna in directly to what had gone on after Becky had died.
So before we get into the kind of trial and sentencing and stuff, I just want to talk about these kind of warning signs that the family then picked up on after this. So like I said, Nathan never liked Becky, but Darren and Angie always just kind of put it down to sibling rivalry. He was like jealous of Becky because she was 2 years old and so she was getting more attention from Angie. And that's just kind of what they put it down to. And he always used to like bully Becky about her weight, about her looks. He was 23 years old and he was bullying a 12-year-old girl, and that shows a real lack of empathy. He also said that Becky would talk to Angie like she was nothing, and she would like argue with her and stuff like that, even though everyone that was close to Nathan said that he did the exact same thing to his mother. He spoke the exact same way to Angie. And honestly, I really don't think it was as bad as Nathan makes out between Angie and Becky, because no one else realised it was that bad. It was only him that realised that their relationship was that bad. So I think it's possibly more likely an exaggeration on his part, since there's no other witnesses to any of these things that Becky did to Angie. He would just find any reason to bully Becky and take out his aggression on Becky because she was a young, vulnerable target. Like, even to the point where he would have to make things up to be able to bully her about things because he ran out of things to bully her about. Like, he would say that she was being mean to Angie. He would say that she's fat even though she's underweight. Like, he really just wanted to make Becky's life a misery. And psychologists have since looked at this relationship between Nathan and Becky, this constant need to bully her and make her life a misery, because that's not a normal brother-sister relationship. So they believe there must have been something something else there. And one of the theories is that because of Nathan's attraction to young, petite girls that were Becky's age, maybe he had a subconscious attraction to Becky. And maybe he knew in his conscious mind that it was wrong to feel that way about Becky, and so he would just take his aggression out on her. And another theory very similar to that one is that maybe he didn't have a specific attraction towards Becky. Maybe he just saw her as a representation for all young women that he should not feel this way about. And so if he sees someone that is a representation of the group that he is not allowed to be attracted towards, maybe that is why he took his aggression out on Becky specifically. So like I said before, Becky had a lot of kind of mental illness problems. She had anxiety, depressive episodes, eating disorder, and so she would see a counsellor quite often. And in one of her counselling sessions when she was just 12 years old, she expressed to the counsellor that she was actually scared of her older brother Nathan, who was 23 at the time. She said she'd feel safe with Nathan if her dad and her stepmom were there, but the minute that they were left alone together, she felt unsafe. And I don't know for what reason. I couldn't find for what reason, whether she was scared of him acting out on physical violence with her, or maybe he would make sexual advances. I don't know. I don't know why she was scared in particular, but she was scared of her own stepbrother. So the counsellor thought it was important to express this to her father, since she'd never told her father that she was scared of her stepbrother before. So the counsellor told Darren, who sat Becky down and just said, "There's nothing to be scared of, he's not going to hurt you." And Becky's father, Darren, says that to this day, that conversation that he had with Becky still haunts him. And he just wonders why she felt like that, because he never really grilled her about it too much. Halfway through this conversation that they had about Becky being scared of Nathan, Becky made a joke about Darren being old. And so they started laughing and joking with each other, and then it turned into a normal conversation. And so Darren didn't really grill her on it too much. After that conversation, that was all they really said on the matter. And so he never knew why Becky felt so scared of Nathan. He never knew what Nathan did to her to make her feel scared of him. And no one will ever know. And Nathan also had a past with underage girls. We obviously know this now that the texts have come out and everything, but his family knew for a long time. The first of which happened when he was just 19 years old, so this was almost 10 years before Becky's murder.
Well, you had these young girls, they didn't look any more than 12, in Becky's car, 4 of them. And he pulled up, he got out of the car, he was grinning, and they started to get out of the car. I went, "What are you doing, Nate?" "No, I don't want, they ain't even getting past my gate, let alone go in the house." So, take them back to wherever you found them, and it was the parents or whatever. You just take them back now, because this ain't funny at all. So this is borderline paedophilia.
Do you wish now that you had gone further with that you had maybe?
Well, I do now, yeah. And in hindsight, yeah, there was a lot of what we call warnings now, and I've been beating myself up for over a year now.
At 19 years old, Nathan Matthews brought home 4 12-year-old girls in his car, and that was his family's first kind of insight into this weird attraction that he had to young girls. And then at 21 years old, Nathan got into a relationship with Shauna Haw, who was really young at the time.
Yeah, he tried telling me she was 19. I said, "I wasn't born yesterday, son." I said, "Put her back in the car and sod off. I am not having someone like that in this house."
Nathan told his family that Shauna was 19 at the time, but in Darren's words, she looked no older than 14. And the whole family just felt really uncomfortable with her being with Nathan, but obviously there's nothing that they can do other than bar her from coming to the house, which is exactly what they did. Angie said, "Until this girl brings me her birth certificate and proves that she is over the legal age of consent, she's not coming in the house." And this was in 2008, and the two of them continued seeing each other, but they never brought that birth certificate to Angie. And then in 2010, 2 years later, they returned back to the house, Shauna with her birth certificate that said that she was 16 years old. And so that just proves that she was 14 at the time when Nathan was 21. But now, even though it was super uncomfortable that their 23-year-old son was dating a 16-year-old girl and had been since she was 14, there was nothing they could do about it because it was legal. But one of the first warning signs that Nathan exhibited was during his first ever serious relationship when he was 18 years old, and this relationship only lasted for a few months. Nathan was insecure and jealous all the way through the relationship, which is not great, but it's not a sign of them becoming a murderer. However, when they broke up, it only got 10 times worse. He would hang around this girl's house, just outside her house, for hours at a time, night and day, to the point where he actually had to be removed by police several times because his ex-girlfriend feared for her safety. Darren also thought about how Nathan would play these like practical jokes on Becky where he would jump out at her and scare her and stuff, which in itself is just a practical joke. However, he would do it really frequently, and he knew how scared Becky was because if you remember, she was genuinely scared. She told her counsellor that. And so she wasn't laughing during these practical jokes. She was genuinely scared, and Nathan saw that and still didn't stop. And I know I keep saying this so many times during this video, but he was 10 years older than her. And the only reason I just want to keep drilling that in is because siblings play pranks on each other all the time. They call each other names all the time. However, he was no longer a teenager and she wasn't even a teenager yet. So there was a huge age gap. It wasn't like they were both a couple of years apart and they were just kind of joking between siblings. This was a fully grown man bullying a child. And this kind of making Becky jump thing is even more eerie when you look at other serial killers. It seems to be a pattern with serial killers and murderers. They want to provoke fear in people just for amusement, for no other reason than to just entertain themselves. And like I said, Becky wasn't in on these jokes. She was genuinely scared of him and he could tell that, and that's why he continued, because he liked seeing this fear in Becky. Obviously at the time the family didn't really think much of it because people play pranks on each other all the time, but obviously in retrospect now it seems so much of a bigger warning sign than it would have at the time. But it wasn't just Becky's dad Darren who was now realising all these warning signs had been there the whole time. Becky's best friend Courtney also recalled her saying that she was scared of Nathan. Becky told Courtney that Nathan had described to her in detail a few times, like more than once, of the different ways that he could kill her, one of which included a sledgehammer. Obviously at the time, Becky's best friend Courtney just thought, oh, it's just a brother trying to scare her. However, looking back on it, that is just so dark. And it was more than once as well, so that just shows that it's like on his mind quite a lot. It also came out around the time that Nathan and Shauna were being held that Nathan was sometimes physically abusive towards Shauna. All of which Shauna claims was consensual. However, from like an outside point you can see that it is abuse. Some of it was like a sexual thing, some of it was just a power thing. She enjoyed being kind of a submissive person in the relationship. It wasn't always sexual, but she said that it was always consensual. He'd do things like pull her hair, make her beg for food, he wouldn't give her money, he would kind of strangle her for seconds at a time, and none of it was like in an angry way, it was just a kind of power thing. It was never during an argument, it was just a power thing in their relationship. And it just kind of reminds me of what he would do to Becky, just scare people and belittle people just to feel more powerful and just for his own entertainment. Obviously Shauna claimed that it wasn't abuse, that it was consensual, which if that is true, then that's completely fine. Like, no one can tell two consenting adults how to have their relationship. However, you do have to think that they'd been together for 7 years at this point. Was it consensual in the fact that they were on the same wavelength and they were both just equally consensual in this? Or was it the fact that Nathan had brainwashed Shauna so much to make her think that she was consensual in this abuse? Maybe it was genuine abuse that maybe Shauna wouldn't be so consensual towards unless she hadn't been brainwashed. Obviously none of us know what is actually going on in their relationship, what actually went on in their relationship. So I don't really think we can say much about that point. I just thought it was kind of interesting to add in there among the rest of the points. And I suppose you can just take that how you want to take it, whether it was consensual and they were on the same wavelength, or maybe he did brainwash her. Who knows? However, there were kind of times when there would be emotional abuse in their relationship, and she said that that was a real thing. The physical abuse was consensual, but the emotional abuse was kind of real. There'd be times when Shauna would tell Nathan that she's gonna leave him, even though she had no intention of leaving him. She just wanted to see how he would react, which in itself is very abusive. And the way that Nathan would react to Shauna's abuse, is with even more abuse towards her. He would just hurt himself. He stabbed his hand with a fork once. He would scratch his face. Like, it was just a very abusive, toxic relationship that they had. Anyway, those were all the kind of warning signs. Some of them might not be warning signs to you personally, but these are just the things that the family have thought about in the aftermath of it all and thought should have really noticed that as it was going on. And like I said, you can decide what you think is a real warning sign or what you think is just normal human behaviour. That's completely up to you. I'm not here to tell you what to feel about these cases. Anyway, back to the actual timeline. Nathan and Shauna have just been charged with murder and perverting the course of justice. A further 4 people were also arrested on suspicion of assisting an offender. These people were Donovan Demetrius, Carl Demetrius, Jadine Parsons and James Ireland. All 4 of which were accused of trying to hide Becky's body parts for Nathan and Shauna. They were supposedly the people that took these body parts to the shed. And the reason that police thought this and the reason that they were actually arrested is because they found in texts from Nathan and Shauna to these 4 people that Nathan and Shauna said that they would give them a 5-figure sum of money if they would hide something for them. Only Carl Demetrius and Jadine Parsons were found guilty of assisting an offender. Demetrius was sentenced to 2 years and Jadine for just 16 months. Both Carl Demetrius and Jadine Parsons both argued that they didn't know that they were hiding a human body. They thought they were actually hiding cannabis. They said that that's just what they thought and they didn't really care too much to ask because obviously it's a very under the table sort of deal. They needed the money, they were gonna do it and get this 5-figure sum. But anyway, they were sentenced and everything, so now on to Nathan and Shauna. Their trial began in October of 2015. Obviously, Shauna's side maintained that she did absolutely nothing wrong. She didn't even know that this was going on. She was just outside in the garden having a cigarette while all this was going on in the house. She had no idea Becky was murdered. And Nathan's side were also sticking to their kind of it was an accident until it went wrong kind of storyline. It came out in the trial that after Nathan had killed Becky, he put her body in his car, either him alone or him with Shauna. That hasn't been confirmed completely, but her body was put into the boot of Nathan's car, and the 2 of them, Nathan and Shauna, just went and sat back in the living room of Becky's home and just waited for the rest of the family to come home. One by one, they would walk past this car where Becky's body was being hidden into the house. Later that evening, the 2 of them drove home. They took Becky's body from the car into the house and laid her in the bath. And then they went back downstairs, they watched TV, they ordered a takeaway and they played Monopoly. The following morning, Nathan and Shauna watched and laughed along to a parody of the Frozen song Do You Want to Build a Snowman called Do You Want to Hide a Body. And then the day after Becky's murder, Nathan went to B&Q, he bought the saw, he bought the gloves, the mask, the goggles, and then came home and dismembered Becky's body in the bath into 8 pieces, including a decapitation, and then wrapped up each singular piece in cling film, salt crystals and cat litter. So Nathan admitted to killing Becky. However, he said that it was an accident. It wasn't murder, it was manslaughter. And he was just trying to fake kidnap Becky just to kind of teach her a lesson, and then the struggle got out of hand and he suffocated her by accident. And he still maintained that Shauna had absolutely no idea that this was going on. She was outside the whole time he was killing her. She had no idea that Becky's body was in the boot of the car on their way home. She had no idea that he was dismembering Becky's body in the bath upstairs, which I find so hard to believe. 1, how could she not hear the saw? 2, did she not go in the bathroom at all for 24 hours? Because Becky wasn't dismembered until the following day and her body was just there in the bath. so how she wouldn't have known that Becky's body was there is beyond me. The prosecution claimed that these texts between Nathan and Shauna showed that the couple shared an unnatural interest in attractive teenage females. It also came out that on the 19th of February, the day of Becky's murder, before the couple actually made it to Becky's house, they went shopping together and were caught on CCTV together buying batteries for the stun gun that they were going to use on Becky. On the day after Becky's murder, on the 20th, obviously there was that CCTV footage of Nathan going and buying those things in B&Q, but also there was CCTV footage of the couple together inside a different shop buying tons of different cleaning products, presumably to clean out the bath after Becky's dismemberment. And if that in itself still isn't enough evidence as to why Shauna did it, her DNA was also found on the face masks and the bags that Becky's body was found in. Finally, after a very short deliberation, Nathan Matthews was found guilty of murder and Shauna Haw guilty of manslaughter. They were both also charged with conspiracy to kidnap, perverting the course of justice, preventing a lawful burial by dismemberment of a body, and possession of 2 stun guns. And like I said, although Nathan said that the reason for Becky's murder wasn't actually a murder, it was an accident, he was going to kidnap her to try and teach her a lesson and then let her go, and it just got out of hand, the judge, on the other hand, believes that this was intentional. Whether he meant to kidnap Becky and take her back to his house and keep her in the attic for him and Shauna, or whether he maybe just did mean to kill Becky on that day. Nathan Matthews was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 33 years, whereas Shauna Haw was sentenced to 17 years. 7 months later, in June of 2016, both Nathan and Shauna tried to appeal their sentences to try and maybe get lower sentences. However, both of them were rejected because their sentences were completely justified. But yeah, that completes this case. Let me know. I am really interested to know if you think Shauna had a complete part in this murder or whether she is just guilty of manslaughter. Obviously, Shauna had some part in it and the court sees that and she's been sentenced to 17 years. However, not as much as Nathan's been sentenced to. And I just want to know if you guys, I just want to know what you think completely. Do you think this was an intentional murder? Do you think they went to her house that day with the intention of killing her? Or do you think it was maybe a kidnap gone wrong? For whatever the reason the kidnap was, whether it was to teach her a lesson or whether to take her to their house, do you think it was a kidnap gone wrong, or do you think it was just a flat out murder? And as well, do you think Shauna had a bigger part in it than she's been sentenced for? Because obviously she's only been sentenced to 17 years in prison, whereas Nathan's got life in prison. So obviously they think he did a lot more than she did. So yeah, I'm really interested to know what you guys personally think. I'm not going to give my opinion on it because Becky was very young and I don't like giving my opinions on such sensitive cases involving children. I just feel uncomfortable doing that, so I'm not going to give my own personal opinions on that. However, I have been kind of sprinkling them throughout this video. I'm sorry about that. Quickly before I go, I just want to tell you something. I don't know if you've noticed, but I filmed this video on 3 separate days. I don't know if you've noticed that. I hope the video ran as smoothly as it possibly could. I've tried to do my makeup the same every single time, but this has actually been filmed in 3 separate chunks on 3 separate days. I've had to try and do my makeup as similar as I possibly can because there's just been like a lot of different problems while I've been trying to film this. Obviously this is a very, very long case. I don't know how long this video has been, but it's been a long one to research and a long one to film. So I knew there was possibly going to be some breaks in it, but I didn't realise it was going to go across a span of 3 days. So I hope it ran smoothly. I hope you couldn't tell too much. But yeah, despite that, I hope this video has been watchable. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure you leave a big thumbs up on it because that really helps me out in the algorithm. I don't know if I say that word right, but everyone else says it, so the algorithm. Subscribe and turn your post notifications on if you want to see some more like this from me, because I upload true crime videos all the time, along with makeup videos, along with Q&As. Just a lot of stuff goes on this channel and we would love to have you a part of it. But yeah, thank you so much for watching and I will see you in the next one. Bye.